Awesome.
Hi everybody, welcome to today's webinar with Birchal. My name's Emily, I'm the Senior Campaign Lead here at Birchal. And just before I introduce you to our founders today, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we are filming from today. I'd like to pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging. So, without further ado, today I am joined by Matt Vitale, the CEO and co-founder of Birchal, as well as Dom Pym, the founder of Euphemia, co-founder of Up, Ferocia, Pin Payments and Clear Interactive, as well as the director at FinTech Australia. Welcome, guys.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Before we get started, I just wanted to run you through a few housekeeping. So Birchal Pty Ltd, the issuer today, is undertaking an offer on the Birchal platform at birchal.com using Birchal Financial Services, Pty Ltd, as the CSF intermediary or the gatekeeper. So this offer will be managed in accordance with BFS's standard operating procedures. For those of you who are new to crowdsourced funding or don't know what CSF is, it's also known as equity crowdfunding, and it's a relatively new form of fundraising in Australia, and it allows startups or small businesses to raise capital from a large number of smaller or retail investors, as well as wholesale or sophisticated investors through an online platform such as Birchal. So instead of seeking funding from traditional sources such as banks or venture capitalists, companies can turn to the general public, which is often their communities, to raise money in exchange for equity in their business. So as I've mentioned, Birchal Financial Services will be the licensed intermediary for this offer. And I'd also like to inform you that the information in this discussion and webinar is for informational purposes only and should not be considered as advice or a recommendation to invest. So I would implore you to do your own research and always consider the offer document and the general CSF risk warning before investing. But if you'd like any further information, please feel free to pop onto birchal.com. Now,
that's a lot.
I'll hand it over to you guys today. Please, Matt, take it away.
Thanks so much, Em. And Dom, thanks so much for joining us on this webinar. I've decided to kind of, keep it high level and free flowing because we often get asked about how you came to use Birchal, be interested in investing in Birchal, and we were kind of sharing that story or reminiscing on Monday night at the Pause Award. So it's probably a good opportunity to kind of share with people, how you came to know about the platform. But before we do that, you've been investing through crowdsourced funding platforms for a long time now, overseas as well. So, keen to, hear some of your observations about crowdfunding markets in a global sense and how we're measuring up in Australia.
Sure. Yeah, no, very great to appreciate being here. And absolutely, I've been reasonably active for probably a decade, I'd say, particularly in the UK market. The main crowdfunding platform, equity crowdfunding platforms there, Cedars, which is now owned by Republic, and Crowdcube. And I was having such a good time on Cedars. I used to live in the UK, and so I had an investment company there, and I had an address and things like that. So I was actually the first international investor on the platform ever. I signed up just like you would regularly. I used my UK address and that sort of stuff, and then I had to provide my passport or do KYC and driver's license. And they realised I was from Australia, and at the time it was only really for UK citizens. So I became the first. Now anybody can sign up pretty much from anywhere in the world, subject to sanctions and things like that. So yeah, I have been investing on the Cedars platform and the Crowdcube platform for quite a long time. But I also invested in Cedars and Crowdcube as companies themselves. So not only was I participating in the equity crowdfunding for other companies, other startups, but I also took positions in the companies themselves. And then they have probably more mature secondary markets in the UK than what we have here in Australia. Or at least for now. Hopefully we can change that. But I actually then participated in a bunch of secondaries ahead of the proposed merger between Crowdcube and Cedars, and then ahead of the acquisition of Cedars by Republic. And so by doing that over a number of years, I became a reasonably substantial shareholder in both of those companies. And it sort of did two things for me. One is that it gave me exposure to how the equity crowdfunding markets are operating overseas. But it also gave me unique opportunities to invest in companies like Monzo, for example, raised on Crowdcube, and plenty of other great companies that I've invested on seed as well. And some companies that have actually done crowdfunding on both platforms, like Solidus, for example, is a climate tech, and invested on both. So that's sort of a quick crash course in my exposure to equity crowdfunding in the UK. And then to, I guess, our introduction and the launch of Birchal, the change in regulations, and the sort of the up and comings of the equity crowdfunding in Australia.
Yeah, it's like it really encouraging to have someone as a shareholder in Birchal that has been, I suppose, such a keen observer of the industries that we've been inspired by in Australia. The UK crowdfunding industry, 2021 was the high watermark. Over £900 billion was raised among just the two platforms that you mentioned, and definitely is the the scale of our ambition in what we can create here in Australia. But our fundraising journey, everyone knows we've raised, or most people know, we've raised capital on our own platform a couple of years ago. Oh, sorry, it feels like a couple of years ago, the start of last year. We're in the midst of another raise now. But prior to that, we're really experiencing a lot of the challenges that many businesses face in finding investors and raising, in particular, those early rounds of capital. And I remember, when Alan and I were hosting our first offers, that your name popped up as an interested investor, and then an investor in many of these companies. And you might remember, but you asked us if we needed capital a few times. I think we kind of ignored you the first couple of times because we were so used to people saying no. And what you guys are doing is really off the reservation. It's not interesting. And then it was amazing when we started really engaging, and we realized that you were serious early in 2020, around when things started to happen with COVID and smashing markets. So yeah, what were your thoughts?
I actually remember it quite fondly because during COVID, I worked most of the time over those sort of 3 years, most of the time out of a shipping container in the driveway, which I had we were doing renovations, and I just had the shipping container delivered, and I hadn't set it up yet. So when we had our first catch up, I was still in my garage, which is kind of like a studio apartment sort of thing. And I just had a fireside chat with Victoria Devine from She's on the Money. And I literally had an open fireplace behind me. So it was like a real fireside chat, but I was the only person in the whole building. So when I spoke with you and the other co-founders and also your advisors, I remember it very fondly because I was anxious. I'd seen the regulatory change in Australia, and I was anxious to help develop the ecosystem. So one of the things we do in my family office now is to assist the entire Australian startup ecosystem, to sort of elevate it, to assist with capital, assist with advice, and also bring it together and be inspired by what we see overseas. So I was very keen to help, not just Birchal. I wanted to help any organisation that was contributing to an important part of the infrastructure. And for me, there was no one better than Birchal in equity crowdfunding, right? It was like market leader, and so I really wanted to invest. And I was very pleased that we managed to get there for that round, and then every subsequent round, including when we've been testing some new features and functionality on the platform, I've been involved in. So I feel like I'm probably a reasonably substantial investor in Birchal now. But also I will mention just a couple of other investments that happened around about the same time. When I think about the Australian startup ecosystem, I think about the entire ecosystem from, raising money with family and friends, raising money with, the public or sophisticated investors, all the way through to venture capital and private equity. So we actually led the round with Aussie Angels as well to do investment syndicates. And then we also invested, may have been one of the first, definitely one of the first 3 investors in Tractor Ventures as well, which are doing debt funding. So we do invest in venture capital firms. We have about 20 or more investments in venture capital firms, and we also invest in some private equity. So what that meant for us is that when I look at the Australian ecosystem, I can now sit back and say, right, If you want to do crowdfunding, we're material investors in Birchal. It's important for us that we can succeed in that. And then when you wanted to elevate your very profitable business and you're looking for some debt funding, then we've got Tractor and Rickson and some other companies that we've invested in. And if you want to run a syndicate, we actually have probably one of the best performing syndicates on Aussie Angels, which brings together other family offices and other high net worth people in order to collaborate on investments, both primary and secondary. So I feel like now we can look at the entire market. And the reason I mentioned those things, not to big note or anything like that, is that I genuinely feel that Birchal is an important part of the infrastructure in the Australian ecosystem. Like, we must be getting close to 200 million now that we've raised on the platform. So you were talking about big numbers before in the UK, but actually, Birchal is dominating in the Australian market with, 70, 80, whatever it is, a huge market share. And we're getting close to 200 million on the platform. So to me, that's material. I've always talked, even in our first meeting, I've always talked about Birchal as a potential on-ramp to the ASX. And what I mean by that is that organisations that aren't yet scaled to the point of doing an IPO or doing mergers and acquisitions, and they've moved maybe beyond family and friends in that very early sort of pre-seed and seed stage, and they're now looking to raise more capital. I think even up to millions, up to 5 million or whatever it is. Those companies have an opportunity to do that almost because they're not ready yet to do a public listing. They're not ready yet to do a large venture capital raise or whatever. So I think that I would go so far as to say that, in my view, Birchal is a critical piece of infrastructure in the Australian startup ecosystem and is contributing to this elevation of the entire ecosystem so that we can be world leading.
Yes, thank you. We are dangerously close to 200 million. With any luck, it'll be closed shortly. I don't know that we can quite get there with our own raise. We're more than 5 million away from it. It's about 194 million raised on the platform, but
early next year. Early next year.
But it's so I'm here in Perth at the moment. I was here for the West Tech Fest. I spoke at the Freo Startup Fest yesterday, and it was inspiring to be able to talk about some of the figures. And I say inspiring because we are the platform. We create the platform really for people to take action. So as excited as we can get, as Birchal, it's really people that have been responding to this and been joining a movement supporting entrepreneurs. But $38 million has been invested into WA startups since we've launched, and it's a not insignificant amount of money, particularly in the context of what the WA startup ecosystem is doing now to accelerate their development as an ecosystem, and funds are starting to emerge. But we've had a lot of success in WA, and I really like coming here because it is this forming stage of an ecosystem. And to your point about Tractor, and I spent a lot of time with Jody and Gary here for the last couple of days, and Cheryl from Aussie Angels. But the message that we're trying to give founders is to open the aperture of where they're looking to source their capital from, because VCs have been very active, but pretty much the only option within founders' mindset for so long. But there are only a handful of businesses that are really investable for those types of investors, given their structure and their model and so on. But that's why it's amazing that you have taken this approach, because to support entrepreneurialism, it's not just a one type of capital that will do that, that will fuel that. We need to be looking for alternative funding sources, and we feel that we've got a pretty compelling one, which is really exciting.
Well, it is important because if you look at just the last 5 years, I think the venture capital market in Australia would be around about maybe 12 years old. Certainly the big three, the Blackbird, Squarepeg and Airtree, are about 10 years old. And so, those on their own can't service the entire market, and nor should they. But also that means that the entire market itself is quite nascent. It's in its forming sort of stages. And in those I'm imagining that Birchal is within the last 5 years when the licensing regime changed. Certainly the syndicates, both Startup Galaxy and Aussie Angels, have launched within the last 5 years, and organisations such as Tractor and others have also launched within the last 5 years. So we've seen rapid change, which has made Australia a more attractive place to set up a startup and then to be able to raise capital. I will say this though, having a little bit of a looking glass and insight into the US markets and the UK markets in particular, there are a lot of amazing opportunities for us to continue growing Birchal, not just in terms of features, but also in terms of the impact that the platform has overall. So getting close to 200 million, I'll call it 195, 190, 195, that is a material amount. I mean, even if you're talking big venture capital firms, that amount of money to be raising from the crowd is actually material and on par with some of the bigger venture capital firms. So if you think about it in that context, I start getting excited about the maturity of the secondary market in the UK in particular. But the other thing I've seen is government getting involved in the UK, where in the crowdfunding segment on the platforms, for every dollar that the public put in for approved investments, the government actually tip in $1 as well. So you get this dollar for dollar matching, which doubles the impact of equity crowdfunding. Another amazing thing that I've seen over there, in addition to just the secondaries, is the maturity of the market to the point where I actually know how big I am as an investor in, say, Seedrs or Crowdcube, because they publish their top crowdfunded shareholders. And so I can see whether I'm in the top 10 or the top 20 of those investors. And I think they're just small things, but they make a big difference. Another really interesting one, I think, is that in Australia, each of those types of capital that we talked about, from venture capital and private equity and equity crowdfunding and so on, those different types of capital for startups are a little bit disparate. They're not integrated. What we've seen in the UK is the venture capital funds launching funds on the crowdfunding platforms. And so the public have an opportunity to become LPs or limited partners in the venture capital firms using Seedrs, for example. And I think that's the sort of areas where there's opportunity for growth in the Australian market. And even though Birchal has a dominant market position amongst the existing crowdfunders, I think we're really just at the start of the journey. And there's a lot more growth and a lot more opportunity to happen. And particularly those hybrid models where we start seeing, for example, secondary or syndicates or even VC or PE happening integrated as part of this equity crowdfunding. Now, obviously, I'm a big dreamer and we're not there yet, but they're the sort of things that we're already seeing in the overseas market. And if we can encourage government to get involved, at the moment there's regulatory constraints. If we can work with government to lift those restrictions and act more like some of those overseas markets, I think the future is very, very bright.
I completely agree. And I mean, it's why we're so inspired by the UK market. I'd say the feature of that market is, how collaborative the industry, other participants in the industry have been with crowdsourced funding platforms. They see the value that they provide in those early stages of capital. In contrast to the United States, it's probably the largest pool of venture capital on the planet. And it's been more of a bridge for them to gap. A gap for them to bridge. But in the UK, that's definitely what we're inspired by. And I think our performance, we're the second largest crowdfunding market in the world, behind only the UK in per capita terms, despite that we started late. But we've had very little of the government support that is, common features of crowdfunding markets around the world. So, the achievement of Australia's crowdsourced funding industry has really been significant. And I think there will come a time when the things that you've described can happen or will be available. And, that represents the scale of the opportunity for us. The other thing which I've spoken about a bit over the last, particularly over the last couple of days, is just the addressable market, the investment universe that we have to access. I think many people don't realise that there are so many Australians out there that love supporting entrepreneurs, but they're not minded to go to Freo Startup Fest or other startup type events. But being able to surface these opportunities to them with social media and many of the techniques that companies use, it's helping us to unlock, a larger universe of investors that are really excited to get involved in this as an asset class. And I think certainly there is lots of growth just from that, just from this awareness building of what is possible now. I want to talk a little bit about, your family office and, how you've supported us, because, I've mentioned, yes, absolutely, you support us with capital at a critical phase and through the first inflection point of the business through COVID. But you've since set up or formalized the Euphemia family office now, and love working with Judy, and she sits as an observer on our board. But you also introduced us to Kate O'Keefe, our newest director, and Kate joined us earlier this year, and her presence on our board, and the areas that she's kind of pushing us into and how she's challenging us has been nothing short of transformational. But maybe if you could kind of explain a little bit about Kate and how you came to know her.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I might actually start at the beginning. I remember after becoming an investor, it's not just words when I say we want to help elevate the entire ecosystem. Like, I remember coming down to Cremorne, joining your strategy day, full day offsite with the whole team, sitting down with the board, sitting down with the executive team, sharing ideas and thoughts about how we've grown the digital bank up, or how we've grown the payments company PIN, or other investments that we've made in crowdfunding over in the UK and all those sort of things. And so I think it first started for me when I had feet on the ground at the strategy day. We then had a shareholder day, and I remember a lot of great collaboration, ideas, sharing, planning for the future. And at that time, we actually had, as part of our investment, a board seat, right? Which we didn't take up. What we ended up doing was wanting to set up Birchal so that we could eat our own dog food, so that all the companies that are listed on Birchal and that are doing their crowd funding on Birchal have the same either constitutions or the same shareholder agreements and so on, the same sort of structural legal documents, governance documents, as the way that Birchal is set up. So as part of that, we agreed to give away a board seat and just have an observer seat. Now, that observer seat is Judy. Judy is, as you mentioned, Judy runs my family office. She was previously the CEO of Startup Victoria and built Australia's, which is now called the Startup Network, and helped to build Australia's largest cohort of startup founders. So over 60,000 individual members of the Startup Network. And Judy runs the entire family office. She's our group CEO. And her being able to sit on as an advisor or as an onlooker in those board meetings, I think, gives us an enormous amount of opportunity to collaborate with Birchal. So it's not just that I say, hey, we want to elevate the ecosystem, and Birchal is a critical asset in that value chain. We're actually at all the board meetings as well through Judy. And then, as you say, Kate is one of those founders that I've met many, many years ago, and she spent probably 10 years in Silicon Valley doing all sorts of amazing things with Cisco, and then she was founding partner for BCG Digital here in Australia. And so she has an enormous amount of experience. I often describe her as the most overqualified startup founder in Australia. And so she's just started a new startup herself, which we were the first investors for. It's a company called HeatSeeker. But anyway, she put up her hand, and I did the introduction, obviously, to you guys, and she put up her hand to join the board. And as you say, she is a very creative thinker. She's design-led. She's got decades of experience being an entrepreneur herself, and then running large corporate venture capital funds, and then coming back and working with large public companies. And so I think the level of maturity that she's been able to bring to the Birchal board and those director discussions, and some of those I've been a guest and been able to contribute directly as well. But I think through Judy and through the relationship with Kate, we've actually been able to help sort of from afar. And that's what it means to run a family office. We're not hands-off. We're very hands-on. And we like to help as much as we can on the ground, whether that be with strategy, whether that be with introductions, whether that be with capital raising. And I mean, I'm here today. We're always very happy to have these type of conversations as well and share our experience. Just hopefully with some of that experience can rub off. But I would say that both Judy and Kate have been material, as have the founders of Birchal, as have the advisors that have been working with Birchal really since the beginning. So I think that that sort of cohort of people has been important to not only shape Birchal, but also to help shape the entire equity crowdfunding market in Australia.
Yeah, thanks so much. And yeah, like I said, particularly with Kate's appointment, I can't thank you enough. She kind of came in exactly at the right time, and kind of describing our next phase of growth as a platform. As a two-sided marketplace, we had to choose, which side of the market to focus on first. And really focusing on founders, making the process as simple as possible for them and delighting them, definitely defined the first phase. As we move forward, that voice of the customer and really listening to the investor side of our audience, now that many of them are, portfolio type investors, having invested multiple times on Birchal, it's, I think what will define our next phase of development, growth, and focus. And Kate's ideas have been amazing, and also her expectations as well. So a lot of urgency at a board level now, which is great. So. Yeah.
Well, I'll just say this as well, that as the business grows, the community becomes so important. I'm not across all the latest numbers, but I think it's somewhere like 200,000 or something like that in terms of the number of people that have participated. I logged into Cake the other day, which is the sort of share registry service, and all my Birchal investments are all there, right? So, or most of them, and so I was, it's awesome to see as it evolves that community. And what I wanted to say is that I think yourself and Callie and Kate and Adam and others are an important part of the ecosystem and that community. So in a double-sided marketplace, you get a community naturally because the founders list their companies, they want to raise some capital, and then the public invest and they become shareholders. I think that in itself builds a community. But I also think Birchal in the second phase of its development can be even more. With that level of breadth nationally of a couple of 100,000 people, that is a massive community that can actually work together to elevate the entire ecosystem, to continue being a venue for startup founders to raise capital, to be involved in the type of events that you're over in WA involved in. I'm in Melbourne, and I'm jealous that I'm not over there for these events. But, we bumped into each other, like you said, on Monday, which was the Pause event. I can see that every event I'm going to now, I see people from Tractor, I see people from Aussie Angels, I see people from Birchal, and I think that community is really, really important. So what I'd like to see is all the people that participate in the Birchal crowdfunding, whether that be for other startups that are listed on Birchal or whether that be for Birchal itself, feeling like they own a little piece of history, a little piece of Australia. And together we can make Australia great. We can make Australia competitive on a global basis, and we can get to those events and we can get to know each other and we can help each other to build businesses. So that community element is something that I'd like to see more of. And someone like Kate is absolutely ideal to be, as you said, pushing boundaries and helping drive in that direction.
Awesome. Em, I thought we might throw to some questions if there are any questions that have been coming through.
Not yet, but if anybody does have any questions, please feel free to pop them in the Q&A box. But I'm happy to ask you some questions if you're happy.
There we go.
Awesome. So I know that you guys have done a raise on the Birchal platform previously. Why are you going with an equity crowdfunding raise versus going to a venture capitalist?
It's a great question, but we've done exactly what we recommend for all of our clients to do, and that is continually talk to investors. There are many people that have expressed interest, through our offer that we've been in discussions with, over months. And crowdfunding is not a mutually exclusive thing. It's, I describe it as a vehicle to aggregate multiple types of investors. In terms of like VC type investors, we've had many conversations with VCs, but like lots of the companies that raise on our platform, VCs are looking for certain types of companies typically, and Birchal might not be a fit the VC type model, and that's okay. There are lots of strategic investors that see a lot of value in what we're doing as a piece of financial infrastructure. But, we're not a B2B SaaS business, which is, the very popular kind of businesses that VC investors look for. We're a fintech that, sees itself as a critical piece of financial infrastructure. And, we're kind of doing what we recommend to everyone is to find the audience that is natural to your opportunity and finding your crowd and your community.
I think it's also, so I was just saying before about eating your own dog food, like one of the great things about Birchal raising on Birchal, it's like Inception. how many levels deep do you go? But like what I was going to say is that raising on your own platform not only builds awareness for your own platform, but it helps us to launch new products with Birchal. We're not doing that this time, but I'm just saying that's one of the things we've done in the last round. For example, we're experimenting with some new products. So I think actually it's a good demonstration to the market of the strength of the platform, that it's so good that we're using it ourselves to raise capital. I think that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, what I'd add to that is exactly the same as the last time that we did this. The learnings and the opportunity to get insight, put ourselves in the shoes of companies that are using the platform. There are a range of improvements, business process improvements, technology improvements that we'd implemented after our first raise, because we're a super user, and the pain points that people are telling us about kind of become understood and elevated. And I'd say a similar thing this time. I think the other point that I'd make is, as we've seen, it is a challenging fundraising environment. Pleasingly, Birchal has been able to defy these conditions, completing its busiest quarter ever this quarter. And the value of what we provide, being able to catalyze a result, you have many conversations with investors, but it is hard to get people to move, particularly in these types of conditions. But running a public process and making it easy for people to get involved, the value of that is really underscored, particularly by us going through this process.
And last time we did a raise on Birchal ourselves in Birchal, it was a record-breaking closing time, right? Like, it was a very quick process, whereas typically raising private equity or venture capital or other forms, month-long, take many months, long processes, sometimes even longer, because you nurture those relationships for a year or more. So I think that it definitely also plays into not only the type of business, but also the timing and the type of round that you're doing. I think, is it obvious that we're doing that? Like, I just said that very casually, but is it obvious that the next round of capital that we're doing is Birchal raising money for itself on Birchal? I wasn't sure if it was obvious to the participants that's what we're talking about here. It's pretty awesome.
It's worth repeating. We've been shouting it from the rooftops, but yeah, thanks. Yes, for everyone that's in any doubt, yeah, we're raising on Birchal. Many people on the call will have expressed interest. Other people otherwise interested in the offer, and we're planning to open next Tuesday. So yeah, it is. And
jumping in, Matt, what does it mean you said some people have expressed interest. What does it mean to express interest, and how does that fit into capital raising?
Yeah, so look, when we built Birchal, we really went to a first principles approach for capital raising, and building a book is a concept of building interest, pre-offer marketing, to understand how much demand is out there for your offer, but also give you an opportunity to have conversations with investors and establish some price discovery before you open your offer. It wasn't really contemplated by the government, notwithstanding that there were relaxed advertising restrictions, but you open the offer. The expression of interest campaign was something that we really pioneered out of necessity, because we're trying to get feedback from people and throw something out there and say, this is us, this is what we're going after, we need capital, will you join us, let's have a conversation. And the process actually hasn't changed very much at all since we've launched. And what that has done is given us amazing data that we can give real insights to companies on how they're going and position their raise. But like all capital raising, momentum and scarcity are critical. So the data that people build during that EOI phase is really useful to to get that early momentum, but then also put some scarcity into the offer as well.
100%. I think that's answered one of the questions that's popped up, is how can you actually invest in Birchal? Next week, you'll be able to. So in terms of after the raise, what would success look like going into 2024?
Success is more improvement to funding volumes. So we've increased funding volume in the first half of FY24, 24% on the first half of last financial year, which is an amazing result. at the start of the year, you know, particularly with accelerating interest rates, you know, broader economic, geopolitical conditions, you know, another war. It's been a really challenging time, particularly for equity capital markets. But this year has been a real exercise in rebuilding momentum. You know, we talk about momentum a lot in the context of capital raising. It's, you know, a lesson for life. Like, momentum is everything. And, you know, I say often, you know, when you have momentum, you can do the seemingly impossible. But if you've lost momentum, it can seem impossible to get it back. But that's what we've done this year. You know, we've focused on our business processes. We've, you know, looked at the way that we're onboarding companies and kind of moving them through our process. And to finish our busiest quarter ever this year is nothing short of amazing. So momentum, continuing that momentum into next year. And there's some really exciting opportunities in the pipeline, particularly for this time of year, and things in really exciting and new industries. And I think that's probably one of the things to remember about what we do at Birchal is that it's not just technology startups. There are many fintechs that we've raised money for, but it's early stage businesses, you know, as an asset class. And that's quite broad. And that's part of the power of what we do is that, you know, there is a home, you know, for capital for many types of businesses that might not otherwise fit, you know, these startup ecosystems that do have a lot of, you know, capital options available for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really exciting to be given the opportunity for people to invest in companies that they would otherwise not be able to. And it's amazing that Birchal provides that as a platform. So I know that there's been a lot of talk around Birchal Trade. If it were to be live now, would existing shareholders be able to arbitrage this current offer?
So if it was live for Birchal, so I think it's worthwhile to just sketch out what Birchal Trade is and how we envisage this working and being useful in the market. Birchal Trade, and apologies, I think I've got a garbage truck outside, so hopefully you're not kind of hearing that through the microphone. But Birchal Trade really leverages the low volume markets instrument. And a low volume market is a market that can be operated without a markets license. So market license for retail investors, it's tier 1 market license, the same that ASX has. So you can imagine it's very cumbersome from a compliance perspective, very costly to operate. A low volume market you can run without a market license, provided that you don't transact more than 100 transactions and more than 1.5 million in aggregate value within a 12-month period. So people need to think about low volume markets in a company basis rather than a generalized marketplace. We ran a pilot for Birchal Trade after our own raise, and it was successful. We completed 35 trades for an excess of demand from our raise. There were many people that missed out, and they had another opportunity to acquire shares through this pilot. So it worked, and that was great. That's the way that we see this working, is that periodically a company, if the conditions are right for them and they've got demand for their stock, then they can provide a mechanism for some of their shareholders to get out. But I suppose we don't envisage this as a continuously open market because philosophically that introduces things like continuous disclosure, you know, a bunch of other regulation, insider trading risk, all sorts of things that the companies at the stage that we're working with them really should be focused on growing their business and executing their business plans. And there will be a time later for them to think about, you know, all of these markets regulation concepts that they need to deal with. So to answer the question, if we were to, you know, run another Birchal Trade campaign for ourselves, it would be after our raise, if there were people that had missed out, that opportunity would be shown to existing investors.
And just a comment on the last time when we were testing Birchal Trade for the first time, we also participated in that. So I think I do feel like we're part of the furniture at Birchal now.
Power user.
Yeah.
Awesome. So obviously we're about to go into a crowdsourced funding offer for Birchal. Is the opportunity there for Birchal to use another mechanism of funding, thereby diluting CSF shareholder value without the opportunity for the CSF shareholders to participate in that round of funding?
Under our constitution, like many companies, we have the ability to raise capital up to a certain percentage without complying with the preemptive rights regime, so without offering that opportunity to other shareholders. And I think that limitation is 10% of the issued capital. And so, that's something that Birchal could do without offering the opportunity to all shareholders. And it exists in our constitution, and it's fairly common for that threshold to exist, to allow companies to do what they need to do if they raise capital. It's probably another reason why we decided to use the crowdsourced funding regime again, is it's a public offer of securities. So in that way, it is open to everyone, and people can participate fairly. But our ability to kind of do things, outside of that, or deal privately in a placement sense with other investors, is naturally limited by our constitution and the preemptive rights regime that it's in it. Yeah.
Awesome. So obviously there's other crowdsourced funding platforms in Australia. What would you say is the key differentiator for Birchal versus those other platforms, and why does it have such a huge market share in terms of the crowdsourced funding landscape in Australia?
Our ambition has always been to grow this industry to its maximum potential. And, as I've mentioned, we look at the UK industry as, a relevant example for what Australia could achieve. So, we've never really measured our success on our performance against other platforms. It's, we're in constant pursuit of growing this industry as big as possible. And, market share, although impressive, is an outcome. We're solely focused on that. And as a platform business, a two-sided marketplace, it is right to have that ambition, because network effects accrue to a larger community. And it's not just for the platform operator, it's actually for everyone, because more data, more insight enables you to provide a better level of service to people and achieve great outcomes for them. So in terms of kind of assessing like us, or the key differentiator between ourselves and other platforms, it's hard for me to answer, because I don't spend a lot of time like looking at other platforms. We focus on our clients, and we let our results speak for themselves. And I think our ability to get results in difficult conditions is what people are increasingly seeing us as, is a reliable option that can get things done even when times are hard.
I mean, I have a view on that as well, Matt, which is we're obviously participants across competitor platforms to Birchal as well. But I would say a couple of things. One is, first of all, we've done maybe 4 or 5 times as many transactions, maybe even more, might be 10 times as many transactions on Birchal as we have all of the other crowdfunding platforms combined. So what does that tell you? That doesn't necessarily say Birchal's the best. It is the best. But I mean, it tells you that there's more deals happening on Birchal. It also tells you that there's this strong community. I would also say, as a user of the platform, when I'm investing in companies, I actually feel a personal touch with Birchal. So even though these platforms, it's a little bit like that with Up, with the digital bank, is that one of our competitive differentiators is that we have real humans dealing with customers, and so customers at the center of everything we do. So that's true for Up. I think it's also true for Birchal. So when I'm investing, I know in the early days, I got emails from the co-founders saying to me, "Hey, Dom, have you got your, I don't know, sophisticated investor certificate?" Or, "Hey, Dom, you need to transfer money," whatever it is. And so, I actually felt that personal touch. And it's even happened to this day where an opportunity has come up and someone from the Birchal team has reached out to me and said, "Dom, this looks like something that you would normally invest in." Or even there's been some companies that I've invested in on Birchal, and then they've done capital raises beyond Birchal. And I've been able to talk to the Birchal team about those investments. So I think that personal touch is, rather than going into a feature by feature comparison of competitors, what we both want, Birchal and Euphemia, is for the entire ecosystem to be elevated, for there to be more opportunity for startup founders, for there to be more players in the equity crowdfunding market. And that's what we're seeing. So I think that in that regard, Birchal is number one. But it's also, I think, the personal touch for a digital platform that has made it more of a compelling platform for us to use as a customer.
I think that's very true. As somebody who works at Birchal, I think we're surrounded by people who are really passionate about the startup ecosystem in Australia, and it really translates through to what we do. And, you know, working with founders and investors alike, we really want to spread that passion and enthusiasm for the startup industry as a whole.
Yeah, the other metric, which I won't have off the top of my head, but Matt might know more about. I was just having a yarn while you dropped off and came back on that.
Yeah, sorry about that. I think the dump truck.
No.
Yeah.
But the other metric for us that's really important, I think, is seeing companies that have raised on Birchal go on to become successful. Or do subsequent rounds on Birchal and, you know, maybe increase valuations or raising more capital in order for them to grow, maybe to expand internationally or whatever. So I don't have those numbers off the top of my head, but anecdotally, what I love is being involved very early in the start of the business and then seeing that business grow and evolve and expand, and their markets that they're operating in expand over time. And that's one of the really special things about some of the companies that we've invested in on Birchal, is seeing them in the AFR, or the Australian or whatever, seeing them do partnerships or go through M&A. It's just been a really fantastic sort of story to watch.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Dom. I think there's such value in seeing companies go from such an early stage and growing, and knowing that you're a big part of that. It's just really, really rewarding for sure.
And just I'll mention that in the UK, some of the companies that I invested in have already exited, so that, you know, they're sold, and we've made, you know, very, very, very good returns. And so one company in particular on Crowdcube exited to one of the big global investment banks for over $1 billion. And I had the opportunity to invest in them when they were doing a crowdfund on Crowdcube in the very, very early days. And we didn't put a lot of money into that investment, but you know, Monzo is another one that I mentioned before, where we were very lucky. There was actually a lottery, you know, even though they were doing a crowdfund, there was so much interest that they ended up doing a lottery. And I was one of the lucky 1,000 people that got into become a Monzo shareholder very, very early. So because that market's more mature, we've actually seen either multi-billion-dollar valuations, multi-billion-dollar venture capital raises, or even in this case, an over $1 billion exit. And, you know, the Australian market's not quite that mature yet. But we're going to be seeing that over the coming years, which is, you know, pretty exciting.
It's an interesting concept, having a lottery to get people into investment.
Well, the demand was way too high, and so and it was really cleverly done, because I remember when I was chosen, I got like a little certificate, and there was like fireworks and confetti and all this sort of stuff, and made me feel very special. And also because I was here in Australia, and Monzo were, you know, growing in the UK, and they were just synonymous with digital banking, neo banking, and it was very, very exciting to be able to you know, become a shareholder through the crowdfunding site.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm very jealous, actually. So, Matt, what would you say have been some of your proudest moments to date after launching the Birchal platform about, was it 5 years ago now?
Like so many proud moments, and I think that's the amazing thing of being able to, you know, start a business and build a community and build a team, and you know, share a lot of these great moments. But, you know, we ride, as you know, we ride the highs and lows with every company that we're working with. You know, getting results for companies is you know, I don't know that there's much greater, you know, there's a much greater thing or greater high that you can get. You know, some of the campaigns that we've worked with this year, like particularly X-Hemp. I mean, X-Hemp, you know, Andy's performance as a founder and just being a really, you know, tenacious believer and resilient and just kind of going after it. There's just so many inspiring things that you get to experience and be a part of. So it's really hard to kind of single out, one as as my proudest moment. Other than to say, actually getting our first raise done. Our first 2 campaigns were absolute failures. I won't name the companies, but like pretty inauspicious start for our platform. And I think it was probably a big reason for our success. It prepared us well to deal with failure and to learn and to adapt. But then, helping Sam Davey from Park raise 300,000, back in 2018, it wasn't pretty. It wasn't pretty at all, but we got it done and we learned so much. And, chatting with Sam about how founders do this now and, kind of thinking back to, the process back then and, building a list, back then, equity crowdfunding was not a thing. I mean, it's still a new concept for people. But back then it was amazing that we were getting anything done. So, and I think that's come to define how we go about things since then is that, it's hard with swimming upstream, but, we're getting to that tipping point now. And that's the really exciting part of what we do.
I think that I know the question was directed at Matt, but I think that from someone sitting on the sidelines, seeing Birchal's last crowdfunding round close so quickly, and again, I can't remember the stats. It might have been 20 minutes or it might have been a couple of days or whatever it was, but it was extraordinary how quickly that campaign came to fruition. And then it reminded me of ZeroCo, which was another one that I tried to invest in, and there was so much demand that I actually got cut out at the last minute, right? Like I thought I'd get in, but I was a little bit late. But I saw that they raised a lot of money, millions of dollars, and they closed that round, $5 million. They closed that round, like, I don't know, again, you would know, Matt, how many days it took. But the other part, like for me, I was proud because our mission to elevate the ecosystem, and we saw venture capitalists participating as investors, as well as crowdfunding in ZeroCo, for example. So for me, that was sort of the start of what I was explaining about the maturity of the UK market, is to be able to see that happen really, really quickly on Birchal, but also see the venture capital market participating as well. That just gave me sort of warm and fuzzy.
Yeah.
Well, I might be jealous of you, Dom, getting in on Monzo, but I got in on Birchal and ZeroCo. I can tell you, ZeroCo was 7 hours, and Birchal was just under 2.
Oh, that's amazing, isn't it? Incredible.
Yeah, they were both really exciting days. I mean, ZeroCo was a nervous one for us in the office because the platform, we'd never experienced such a high volume of traffic come in at once. And our product team were there hands-on trying to navigate ways that we could actually get everybody onto the platform and get all of these investments in. And it was really, really exciting and stressful at the same time.
Yep.
I know, Matt, you've got to jump off in a minute, so we might close it up there. I will send the recording round to everybody. So if you'd like to rewatch or if you missed any of it, you can watch it again a bit later on. But I'd love to say thank you so much to both of you for coming today. I think this is a really exciting webinar and it was great to hear both of you chat. And if anybody has any questions, please feel free to reach out via the Birchal profile on the Birchal website. But thanks again, guys.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks for having us. See ya.
Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.